I want to say a little bit more here about Trump's grotesque Tulsa, Oklahoma trip that he has planned. I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the week, last week, but Michelle Goldberg kind of updates everything. Let me share with you what she wrote. In Tulsa, Oklahoma in June 1921, whites set fire to the predominantly black Greenwood neighborhood after a black man was accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. Now, most people, or at any rate, most of the readers of the New York Times, and I might add people who listen to this podcast, remember Trump's response to the riot in Charlottesville, Virginia, with the American Nazis and the white supremacists, and the most grotesque, dumb fucking look of white men ever assembled, except maybe at Pickett's Charge or something. But most of us remember that as a particularly low point in a phony-ass presidency that is noted for its low points. And then you remember after a rambling news conference in which he defended some of those marchers, the marchers, the neo-Nazis, as, quote, very fine people, end quote. Trump's already rotten approval rating hovered below 38%. People who worked on staff at the White House privately, anonymously, of course, voiced shame and disgust to journalists. And, our dear Senator Susan Collins, she was, her word, concerned. I am concerned when I see the President of the United States talking about Nazi people being very fine people. I'm not mocking her. That's the way she's talked. That's not because of any impediment that I'm aware of. That's the way she talks. What's been forgotten in the almost 3 years since then is what came next. Michelle writes, for his first post-Charlotte rally, Trump chose not a blood-red excerpt where he could go and be surrounded by morons, but he chose Phoenix, Arizona, a blue city with a large Hispanic population whose Democratic mayor begged him to stay away. Remember that? Don't come here, ape. Don't come here. But he did. And if you remember what happened, on stage, Trump hinted at his plans, which he then fulfilled, to pardon Joe Arpaio, the former Maricopa County sheriff, who'd been convicted of contempt of court after defying a judge's order to stop detaining people simply on suspicion that they were undocumented, and they weren't white people. And outside, when the pig was in there, the orange ape was in there doing his rabble-rousing, protesters gathered, violence erupted as riot police confronted them. The Arizona Republic newspaper at the time reported it this way, quote, some screamed, some poured milk on their face, slick skin soaked in sweat, burned from the chemicals in the pepper balls and pepper spray. Yeah. And as the Washington Post reported at the time, Trump's filthy, goddamn inflammatory event was part of a pattern. The Post reported it this way, quote, when he finds himself under attack or slipping in popularity, he often holds a rally in a place like this, a diverse blue city that's home to liberal protesters, but surrounded by red suburbs and rural towns filled with Trump supporters who will turn out in droves, end quote. For example, his if you remember, his first rally after the Democrats launched the impeachment inquiry, Trump's first rally after that was in the Minneapolis district held by Representative Ilhan Omar, whom Trump has repeatedly insulted, demonized. Michelle writes, it's important to keep Trump's instinct for escalation in mind when considering his decision to hold his first post-shutdown rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma next Friday, which is Juneteenth, the holiday that celebrates the end of American slavery. And of course, Tulsa was the site of that white rampage with as many as 300 people killed and one of the worst incidents of racist violence in American history. Trump knows this. Trump knows this. Just like Ronald Reagan knew when he gave his announcement to run for re-election, he went to Philadelphia, Mississippi to make the announcement. Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the three civil rights workers, the three young guys, Scherner, Goodman, and damn it, I forget the names. Two from New York, two of them Jewish, one of them African American from the area, where they were captured by racists working with the white red man chewing tobacco fuck sheriff and brutalized and murdered. Cheney, Shorter, and Goodman. It just popped into my head. That's where Ronald Reagan went to announce his re-election campaign. Oh well, but I digress. Representative Val Demings, the Florida Democrat, said, quote, the president's speech there, Tulsa, on Juneteenth is a message to every black American of what's coming. More of the same. End quote, Val Demings. And as soon as the rally was announced, according to Michelle, people started asking a question that Trump often forces people to ask, which is, was the president being stupid or evil? Oh, come on. This is the Antichrist. Michelle writes, after all, it's highly unlikely that Trump, who reportedly didn't know what happened at Pearl Harbor when he visited in 2017, is familiar with the Tulsa massacre, but there are people around Trump who are sophisticated enough to understand the message the rally is sending, including Stephen Miller, one of the president's closest aides and an out-and-out white nationalist. Michelle writes, well, Stephen Miller to me is the Nazi Jew. He's like I'm going to get the term wrong, but I think it was Sonderkommando, the ones who, the Jews who worked in the death camps, who let the Nazi executioners know who was next. Or the ones that carried the corpses out of the crematoria. I don't know. I have the terms mixed up. But that's what Stephen Miller is. He is a filthy, rotten to the core Nazi. And because he's a Jew, is he not aware that when the hammer finally comes down, he will be one of the first to have his head cut off? But the Trump administration is certainly aware of what Juneteenth means. The White House press bitch, Kayleigh McEnany, called it, quote, a meaningful day to the president. And then she went on to say that he wants to share some of the progress that's been made as we look forward and more that needs to be done. Oh, yes, because the president just loves Negroes. He does. Michelle writes, there's simply no reason to believe that Trump is going to Tulsa to try to ease intercommunal hostility rather than exacerbate it. Of course, this is Trump. Omar Wasow, an assistant professor of politics at Princeton, said, quote, it feels like a presidential act of trolling. Of course it is. This Professor Wasow was recently received a lot of media attention for his work showing how violent protest in the 60s contributed to Nixon's 1968 victory, if you remember that. So far, this year's civil unrest isn't strengthening Trump's position in a similar way, though, partly because of Trump's own role in it. As has been said, Trump is more George Wallace than Richard Nixon. It's hard to believe that people don't know what they're doing with Trump's Tulsa appearance in 2017. The Post described how rallies in blue cities, quote, allow Trump to highlight the deep division in the country and force voters to pick a side. Tulsa has a Republican mayor, but a similar strategy seems to be at work with the Juneteenth event. Michelle closes by saying Trump isn't torn. He wants to tear up the country. Yeah. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. You have your choice. You can listen to the ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com. And never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.